Hi, you guys. I'm so excited to have this conversation with both of you. Ed, I have known you for so long. I don't know when we first met, but you have always been my eco mentor. And I'm just love being able to ask you so many questions over the years. I have so much respect for what you do. So thank you for coming, Ed. And Zach, I discovered you, I think 2 years ago or something. And I'm so impressed by you. I want everyone to go to your website and read up about everything that you're doing, how you talk about health, the planet, everything. You are so inspiring. The way you live your life, both of you are such inspiring people. And I just think, Zach, that you are doing tremendous work through the web, through the internet. You're helping people. Or it's not the internet. What is it? It's Instagram is where I find you. You are helping people so much, and I'm so grateful. So thank you for coming and having this conversation with us.
Glad to be with you all.
I think I'll just start by talking about. I'm going to go back and forth between both of you and connect you both often. But um, I know, Ed, that you have talked about that when you first started your journey, you didn't have a lot of money. You were not, because I think a lot of people think that making eco choices is about being rich or having enough means to do so. And I really want to focus in today on what we can all do and how it's not about what you have. And you're a perfect example because you started this with very little, I believe, and you just kept making better and better choices as you went along. Can you talk about that?
I was a broken, struggling actor when I started this environmental path back in 1970. My dad had just died, and he was, as is the case with many people that age, he was my meal ticket. You know, he paid a lot of my bills and what have you. I was starting to take over those bills as I worked a bit as an actor and a lot as a camera assistant back then. But then Earth Day came along, and I wanted to do something because my dad died within a few days of the first Earth Day, and he was a conservative that liked to conserve. He turned off the lights and turned off the water. He was the son of Irish immigrants. He had lived through the Great Depression, so I got a lot of that inspiration from him. And I couldn't afford to do much. And people come up to me today and they say, "I can't afford 9 kilowatts of solar like you or a fancy electric car like you." I go, "I understand. Neither could I when I started. Can you afford to get a bus pass if you can ride public transportation if it's available near you? Can you afford to ride a bicycle? Can you afford to change one light bulb? Many utilities give them away. Can you afford to use baking soda, vinegar, and water instead of harsh cleansers?" And on and on. I list that incredible list that's available today of cheap and easy stuff, picking that low hanging fruit. And then I promise you, as I sit here before you both, you're going to save money, and then you can do some more, do some medium ticket items. And one day, God willing, as I got lucky and did some big ticket items after 15 to 20 years of saving money on the cheap stuff.
What would you say was the reason that you were compelled, aside from your dad being conservative? Why did it matter to you to do these things? Why did you care about changing the light bulb?
My dad was a good influence. Boy Scouts was a good influence. I got to see nature up close and personal and thought, it was worth preserving. But the negative, if you will, was living in
Yeah.
smoggy LA. Horrible choking smog. You couldn't run from here to the street a few yards away as a young person without it searing your lungs. You had trouble breathing like this. And I'm not an asthmatic, but I regularly and my other chums would talk to each other like that. It was very, very bad. And now consider this, if you will, when people get overwhelmed by the negative news and the challenges we have before us. We have 4 times the cars in LA from 1970, millions more people, but we have a fraction of the smog. We've done a very good job of cleaning it up, and we can do that and now continue to protect people like the people around the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach are still breathing dirty air because of those ships and other equipment there. The people near the fulfillment centers like Amazon and other fulfillment centers and trucking centers and what have you, they have dirty air we have to clean up for everybody, and we will do that. But we've come a long way. But it was that dirty smog that got me. Then the Santa Barbara oil spill, the Cuyahoga River catching fire. Those big ticket item kind of shocking things. But especially living in smoggy air in LA, that was the big one.
Zach, what about you? I mean, I know that you are a doctor and you care so much about the earth and people's health and how it's all connected. How did this start for you?
My journey began in unexpected places, I guess, in designing chemotherapy at the University of Virginia back in 2005, 2010. That was a lot of my research, I was in internal medicine, then endocrinology and metabolism. And the word metabolism really refers to the capacity of the human body to make energy. And as you look deeper into the topic of energy in biologic systems, you find some fascinating microcosms of what we see Ed talking about now, that he sees, pollution and dysfunction going on the planet. It turns out the same thing is happening at the cellular level to give us epidemics of cancer, epidemics of autoimmune disease, epidemics of metabolic disorders like diabetes, obesity, heart disease, and the like. And so what we are learning in the last 30 years, as we've really started to untangle metabolism and genomics, is that we are what we breathe, what we eat, what we see, what we touch. We are a contiguous biology with the planet. And so when we see air pollution, you have that same phenomenon happening at the cellular level. And the toxins that we take in have shifted a lot in the last 40 years. And so in 1970, as you were talking about, Ed, air pollution was a primary source of toxicity for the human body. But in 1976, something really shifted, that we started applying in broad spectrum antibiotic to soil systems. And that was a compound called glyphosate. And these herbicides and pesticides that started to be integrated into our food system were unfortunately water soluble, which meant that they would end up inside the food that we consumed. And of course, our bodies are 70% water as a vessel. And so we became a depository for these chemicals, and we began to pollute the body. And the first thing that happens when you see that happen with the kind of binding of toxins at the cellular level is the collapse of these tiny little microbes that live inside of ourselves called mitochondria. And these are tiny little methane producing bacteria that were absorbed by a larger bacteria about 3 billion years ago. And when we started to develop the capacity for this double bacteria, we had an exponential improvement in our ability to produce energy at the cellular level, which allowed for multicellular life to occur. So we moved from fungi, kind of single-celled organisms, bacteria and fungi, to these multicellular organisms that would ultimately become things like parasites and then worms and then reptiles. And ultimately, we would see the emergence after the last great extinction of things like the mammals and humans and all of this. And so that march towards the vitality of the planet and the beauty of the planet that we now live on came out of the capacity to produce energy. And starting in the 1970s, we started to fundamentally undermine our capacity to make energy at the cellular level as we poisoned these little bacteria, these mitochondria inside our cells, and we collapsed our ability to make energy. And it's been very obvious, perhaps, but I think a fascinating journey for me over the last 15 years, as I've started to realize that you cannot choose to make people healthy. I can sit there all day in my clinic and make decisions, for one patient at a time, but it's absolutely impossible for me to prevent or ultimately cure disease if I don't start to work on the planet. If we don't see ourselves as contiguous with the planet, we will go extinct. And we only have about 80 to 100 years left at our current levels of collapse of biology, not just for human health, but soil systems. We only have about 60 harvests left on the planet, 60 harvests left on the planet before we see the complete loss of soil systems. And that's exactly how the last great extinction occurred. So 55 million years ago, we had a huge asteroid hit the planet, and we saw extinction of the dinosaurs famously, but it really took 93, 97%, somewhere in there, of life on Earth with it. And that was because of the death of the topsoils, which led to the acidification of the oceans. Here we are 55 million years later. We are the existential, crisis on the planet, and we are killing the topsoil and acidifying the ocean through our chemical herbicides and pesticides. And I think it's poetic that those same chemicals and herbicides killing the topsoil are the ones poisoning our ability to make energy, and therefore the collapse and extinction of our own species. And so these checks and balances that exist in nature aren't going to let us escape this phenomenon. We can't kill the planet without killing ourselves. And I think that's some sort of grace and justice at the cellular level there. But that's how I found myself into this pathway of leaving the university in 2010 and setting out with a desire to really discover the opportunity to find a science and an education platform and start to innovate in areas of energy technologies and the like, so that we can start to understand how not only can we clean up the planet, we actually have the science right now and the technological opportunity to make the most abundant life on the planet, because we now understand carbon cycles. And so instead of demonizing CO2 and all of this, we need to understand how that is actually the literal fuel for life on Earth. And we need to reconnect the carbon cycle for life to reoccur. But really, we have the opportunity to push beyond some previous thing and do what Mother Nature does best, which is innovate every time. So when you see an extinction event, life always comes back more intelligent, more abundant, more biodiverse. That's going to happen again, maybe in a few million years if we go into a complete extinction, or in a couple hundred years, we could be the co-creators with that Mother Earth as we connect those dots.
Those are such big things, and I wanna get into all of that, and I thought perhaps we could start by saying the most simple things that we think of that people can do to make these changes in their daily lives, because and then we can go bigger and bigger and bigger. When I think about what are the things that make them that affect us, that lead us to the path that you just said, that are leading us to this destruction, what are the most critical things that we do in our daily lives that do that? And for me, I think it's food. I think it's the clothes that bless you. I think it's the clothes that we purchase. We're consuming too many. There's just you can make easy choices to go to your thrift store instead of buying new clothing, and instead of getting your or go to the Real Real if you want something fancy. And if you're going to buy new things, there are organic and natural materials and good eco companies out there who are doing really responsible things. So fast fashion and all that has got to go. I think about the products we buy in our homes. Ed mentioned using baking soda and vinegar and things like that, which is wonderful. And if you're going to use products in your home that you haven't made, there are good, responsible ones out there that are not, your regular Downy or whoever, Tide, all that stuff's got to go. Poison, poison, poison. Poison for you and your home and the earth. But what and I also think about my water bottle, the filtration system, just the plastic bottles, how this one of the simplest thing you can do is just get one of these, right? And your canteen and fill that thing up, and you never have to, yes, there you are. You never have to buy plastic. You save yourself so much money. I was on a hike with my son the other day, and I was very disturbed because it's a beautiful hike, but everyone had a plastic bottle in their hand. And I was just like, what is going on? You're on a hike in Los Angeles in nature, walking to a waterfall with plastic bottles and Cheetos. Like, what's going on? And really hurt my heart and made me realize how much work we have to do, because sometimes in our circles it feels like we're doing so, everyone's rocking the same way, but it's not. And so anyway, what would you say, other than the things that I've mentioned, are the things that people can do right now that are so easy, like dish towels? And I don't use any paper towels, no tissues, that sort of thing. Using cloths for your handkerchief, the old fashioned handkerchief. What are the things that you guys think are the most important things that I haven't mentioned?
The phenomenon of energy and health for the planet is really going to come back to the energetics of our behavior. And if you want to have a metric for the energetics of your behavior, you can actually look at your bank account. Money is a form of energy. It's an incredibly good metric for global energy consumption. And so if you have a huge bank account, or you have hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars or billions of dollars of assets, what you're looking at is actually extracted energy from the planet that has been transferred into the form of money. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to look at civilization as a whole and understand that we became consumers rather than receivers. And if we go back to all of our indigenous roots, we all have indigenous roots. And if we go back to the ways in which our ancestors lived thousands of years ago, they were in receipt of nature's bounty. And nature was, in fact, bountiful. And there was an abundance on this planet that remains so today. If you go down and spend time with the Achuar tribe or something like that in the Amazon rainforest, they've been living in the same place for 40,000 years and have been thriving there in a state of abundance. And they've never been for lack of opportunity to thrive at the biologic level, at the community level, at the psychospiritual level. They've had this sense of connection to Mother Earth They consider the jungle the home of all humans. They consider, all things that they have at their fingertips for resources, something that belongs to all of humanity. And so they have this sense of abundance, this sense of singularity of who we are as a human species. As we started to develop the belief of ownership, we started to believe in scarcity. And so it's an interesting shift that happened as we look at colonialism and all of this. And what's ultimately happened at that micro level of our day to day lives is we are extremely extractive. And the result is poor health for us and poor health for the planet.
Mm.
So the little things that we can do is start to change our mindset from being a consumer to being a co-creator, or to be in receipt of nature's bounty and co-create with her. And so as Ed goes through his list of things that I think are brilliant in just those little steps that you can take, I want you to just keep thinking to yourself, how does that change my mindset from being a consumer, which means that you're going to be extractive and you're going to be piling up stuff in your house and you're going to be spending that energy called money, and there's this exchange for energy of money and energy that it takes to produce the goods and services that you rely on for your convenience lifestyle. How can you really shift that? Because I think if we just do the little things and don't start to change the big thing, which is our mindset of who we are and how we collaborate with the earth, we'll still fall short of the massive transformation that we need to make as a species. So that little switch, how can you stop being a consumer and start being a co-creator?
That reminds me of the idea that because a lot of people sort of want the government to take care of all of this or corporations to take care of this, and it's not wrong to want that. We all need to work together. But I think if you don't take care of it yourself first and do what you said, have a reshift, the act of refilling your water bottle, every time you do it, it's because of love of the earth. It could be love of your pocketbook if you want it to be that. But I'm sure for Ed and I and you, when you're filling your bottle, there's just such a sense of connection that you're doing something responsible and kind and thoughtful and not unconsciously. And I think that all of those choices that we make, all of those little choices that we make that are conscious and good for the earth are us being awake and present to what this life is. And if we understand that, then we can ask government and others to participate. But if we continue to eat the Cheetos in the plastic bottle on the daily, and we and we say, but it's the government's fault and it's the corporation's fault, the corporations and the government go, you don't care. You're not living in connection with what you're not congruent with what you're saying. There's nothing, you're just asking us to do something that you don't care about. So I think until we really, each person has to do this on their own. They have to make these choices on their own for the sake of their children, for the sake of the future, for the sake of now, for good air, for good water, for good food, so that, or even just for their health, but so that the powers that be are inspired by the choices that you're making and they understand that you demand this and where you come, why it's so important. I also think that people forget how their health, they say that these choices are so inconvenient. All of these things are inconvenient for their lifestyles, to think about what you're doing, to make a different choice. Um, but when you think about how much time, and I'm thinking about food choices right now, the choice to eat a vegan diet, for example, which I think all three of us do. Um, when you do that, you save so while it feels like this inconvenience to you, the amount of time and energy that you save from not being sick, from not losing time at work, from not spending money on doctor medications and bills, um, from quality of life, just feeling so good that you get to enjoy this precious gift that is nature and life and love. So I think that we forget that exchange, that you're trading one thing for another, and I think it's really an important thing. Ed, do you have any things you want to add to that concept right now?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're both of you remembering to talk about diet. It's so important. That's one of the best things you can do is, even if you're a meat eater, and I'm not. I became a vegetarian back in 1970 with the first Earth Day. I stopped eating meat, and then I later became a vegan. I went further and enjoy that. but that's one of the best things you can do. But even if you're a person that likes their meat, try one day a week, as most people would suggest. Most doctors, AMA, kind of typical doctors would say, yeah, eat more plant foods, eat your broccoli. Try it just one day a week, having a vegan diet one day a week. And if you like it, do it two, do it three, and maybe one day all seven. And it's one of the best things you can do for the environment. And I like what Zach said about the overall theme of doing this. It's fine, you take an example. There's a fine movie called Chinatown. There's lots of wonderful, intricate little details in it all. But the main thrust of the movie, the theme is, if you're rich, you can get away with murder. That's what's underlying the beautiful movie Chinatown. That's the theme of the movie. And so the theme beneath what we're talking about, all of us are talking about, not just saving money, this or that. The theme is being part of something extraordinary in nature, not being separate from it, to be an integral part of it, which we are. We can deny that we are, but we are, like it or not. And to move us in a direction away from the destruction that we seem to be on that path for so long now, and move towards the kind of change that we need to be and we need to see, so that nature has a chance to, revive and and do well again, in spite of all that we've done. We've done a lot of damage, but look at the way things bounce back. And we've had incredible luck with things in the past we thought were dead. The Hudson River was so polluted, you couldn't go near it. And they cleaned up the Hudson River. The Cuyahoga River that caught fire in 1969 does not catch fire anymore. It's been greatly cleaned up. We've cleaned up a lot of these horrible, horrible messes, and we can do even more. So let's get on that path and have that common theme underneath. If you want to save money, fine. If you want to, save the environment, that's fine. But the theme is being part of something essential for our well-being. It's not just save the spotted owls and the snow leopard. I hope we do that, but we're also saving ourselves. So we're being an integral, important part of nature.
This brings me to the conversation of hope, which you're both talking about. You have a quote I found, Zach, a coalition. Well, this is maybe it's not a quote, it's just about what you guys are doing. You have a coalition of farmers, educators, doctors, scientists, and business leaders aiming to expose the human environmental impacts of chemical farming and offer a path forward through regenerative agriculture practices. And that is what you founded. And you said that you believe that we can heal. I don't think it's too late for us to turn our microbiome around, but we have to do it very, very quickly, and we have to do it together. So I love that we're all talking about hope, that while there are these devastating things happening, there is so much hope, and we can turn it around. And this other quote I have from you is, pharmaceutical chemicals and drugs are now the main ingredient in our foods. It's time for the American consumer to empower our farmers to take back our food and our right to the health that the food should bring us and our children. And and so where I'm going with all of these things that you're saying is, so here's one more. Your nonprofit is creating avenues for collaborative action for all stakeholders in our global community for a regenerative future of health for the planet and our children. So let's talk about regenerative agriculture, because I'll just start. I want to hear everything you guys have to say about it, but I want to start by saying that to the, I don't really understand it that well. And I know that I know what biodiversity, I mean, biodynamic farming is. I know what organic farming is. I know how important those are. And I got into a discussion with a gentleman recently who told me that it was really critical that we eat animals because of regenerative farming, and had this whole argument that livestock was such an important part of that. And I was trying to argue gently that you can still use the animals in a collaborative manner, like chickens can be on the farm, but they don't have to be. Once you decide that you're going to kill them and use them for food, now you're back into the system of destruction because of how much resources they take when you're using them for food. There's the supply and demand aspect of it. But can you talk about, I'm assuming that your idea of regenerative farming has nothing to do with that. Can you talk about that for me, Zach?
Yeah, so we launched projectbiome.org about 4 or 5 years ago, and the first focus on it in its three categories of impact, which is soil, water, and air, was to start to zero in on the soil as kind of ground zero, if you will, of the crisis that we have on ecology and human health in our interaction with the food system. The soil literally is where life begins. And if we don't quickly bring our farmers into the knowledge base of how that operates at the soil level, we'll die. But they can't really make a fundamental change until Nestle and the biggest food companies in the world start to understand how they participate in creating these false economies for the farmer. And we have to come to terms with how the USDA and crop insurance have also created a very bizarre subsidy for the wrong decisions, the wrong management practices. And so we need to bring all the stakeholders to the table, from Nestle to the government to farmers, to start to really fundamentally change the way we understand soil systems to work. And fortunately, that knowledge base is there, and regenerative practices have been in play for tens of thousands of years. We just need to understand why and how to scale those globally. And for too long, we have divorced ourselves from our food system. We don't understand where the carrots come from that we grab off the shelf. We don't understand where the pork chops come from that we pull off the shelf. And so we have to come to terms with the fact that it's our disconnect with the humanity in the process that has largely led to this complete, corruption, if you will, of our relationship to nature.
One of the things that people like to say is, "Oh, but I'm helping support my farmer. Like these are just small, sweet farmers with, and that's not the case in the USA at all. Wouldn't you both agree?
Yeah, one of the most important parts of me buying my first home in 1979, I had two very young children, and I wanted them to know where food came from, that it didn't come from the Ralph's tree or the Safeway bush, that it came from healthy soil, water, sunshine. And so I bought my first house in 1979. The concurrent with the closing of escrow was the delivery of a large compost drum, had a handle. It was a really good one. And I would turn it like this and it would kind of mix it all up. It was great. And I had the best garden right out of the gate because I did it all the way these people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years, just good organic. And I got everything for free. I didn't pay for any Miracle Grow or anything. I didn't use energy to truck good stuff off site like grass clippings or leaves or table scraps. I didn't use energy to take it away. I didn't want to take it away. I wanted to keep it in my home, same way I do in my home today. And I didn't pay to truck stuff into my home like Miracle Grow and bags of, because I make all my own soil by mixing up, the food waste and the other stuff and make healthy soil. So that's definitely the way to go. And it's very important that people connect for their food, for their own sanity. There's nothing more powerful than young kids that I brought to my many different houses to give an eco tour, and they get their hands in the dirt. You have them pick up, and it's crawling with worms. You go, that's healthy soil. I'll go with you to the Central Valley, and you give me a shovel. You won't see any earthworms in that soil. Very few farms because it's all dead. It's like a creature on life support with a nasal cannula and an IV, laying in a hospital bed. Everything's coming from outside, and you want healthy soil. And earthworms are usually a pretty good sign of that. If you got good worms in the soil, you got good soil, and I've always had that because of the practices, you know, done for thousands of years with people around the world.
Yeah. I love growing my own food. And I remember coming to your house and wandering through your beautiful garden and seeing all your fruit trees and using I was so inspired and I use permaculture here and I have my compost and the only thing is a beehive has
Great.
moved into my compost. So that's a bit tricky right now. But growing your own food and picking it is like you said, when children do that, there's a little girl that, I mean, there's so many people that their kids, they don't eat vegetables, but once they start touching them and eating them off the vine, they're just like, "Oh my god."
It's a powerful connection for a young
It
person. Very
is. I
important.
still don't quite understand when you're saying regenerative, it sounds like a concept, not it's not like biodynamic farming and organic farming is very clear. I understand what they're doing and not doing. And but this guy who I was arguing with about his how livestock, I need to have an answer for this. Why is he saying that livestock are necessary for that process? And is that true? And is this another kind of farming that's different, superior to biodynamic and bio and organic? Or is it just inclusive of all of that?
So regenerative agriculture is a description of a a potential, right? So it's not prescriptive as you would find with a lot of systems like organic. If you go to the USDA organic thing, it's basically a list of 30 things you can't do. And to get that USDA organic certification, it doesn't actually mention anything about soil, microbiome, nutrients, anything that's actually vital to the consumer. And so when we start to shift towards these prescriptive regulatory environment beliefs about food systems, we end up saying a bunch of no's, and we become anti. And anti is a very weak position ever. You don't want to be anti anything. You want to be pro something. And so Ed is pro planet. Ed's practices, Ed's lifestyle is showing us a pathway towards pro vitality, really. And so this is what we need to start to think of in the farming world, where we need our farmers to have a whole host of resources at their and practices at their fingertips that would allow them to wake up every morning to think about two things. How do I increase the amount of energy in my soil systems? And how do I increase the amount of biodiversity within those soil systems to allow them to produce as much as possible? So regenerative practices start with disturb the soil less and maximize the amount of respiration or breath that the soil can take. And to do that, stopping plowing is a critical piece, which is interesting because the plow is often credited with the beginning of Western civilization. If you pick up a Western Civ book, it says it starts with the invention of the plow. And so in the end, we destroyed civilization with that plow by not understanding our relationship to soil microbial life. And then we accelerated that massively when we created herbicides and pesticides. So you stop plowing, you stop spraying the antimicrobials or the herbicides, and very importantly, you keep the soil covered. Covered soil always has earthworms. Bare soil bakes the earthworms out of it. And so if we really change the way in which we practice farming and stop just doing a checklist of we didn't do these 30 things, but we still have dead, bare soil, we're not going to survive.
So how are we going to build our armies to do this? Like, how does one who's going, I want to only support this kind of farming, looking for biodynamic farming, how do I make sure that that's what's happening? And then on a bigger scale, how are you teaching or how are you educating or inspiring these farmers to do it differently? Because they don't even want to let a chicken raise their arm this much. Like, we fight over if the chicken can raise its arm this much versus this much. Like, they're not allowed to lift their wings. So these farmers, for 1 cent, to make a, for these billion-dollar companies, these huge corporations, they just fight over the stupidest little thing because of a penny, and convince very kind people that their costs are gonna go up. And so how are you, what are you doing about this?
Well,
And what
we're
can
all
we
in
all
it
do?
together, which is, yeah, we're all in it together. So there's a lot of things we can do. So, if you start with your backyard, like Ed did, it's a very powerful tool. The fourth largest crop that we grow in the United States, you got corn, soybean, wheat. Number four is lawn. We grow millions and millions of acres of grass in our backyards across this country, which has very little biodiversity. And actually, landowners, homeowners, use more herbicide per acre than any farmer in the world does. And
Okay.
so, your practices in your backyard are going to set the tone for this recovery. And so, you may not think of yourself as a farmer, but if you have a yard, you are a steward of land. And the way in which you steward that land has a huge effect on where we're at as a planet. And so, like Ed did, you stop using all the herbicides, pesticides, and your NPK chemical fertilizers, like your Miracle-Gro has mentioned, things like that. And you start composting, and you start using your own carbon cycle again. So all your food waste, your lawn waste, all those things start going back into a compost. And think about digging up the backyard and putting in a food system, or even xeriscaping, or keeping the soil covered but not necessarily under grass production. It would be an option too, but you're really looking at keeping biologic systems moving, and you want biodiversity in there. When you move from that consumer mechanism of I'm a homeowner and therefore I have a lawn and therefore I need to buy some stuff to keep the lawn alive, to a co-creator where suddenly you've got a backyard garden and you've got your compost, you're doing this, you are starting to participate in a cycle of life. And I think each homeowner has a responsibility to begin to understand that. And even if your home doesn't have a yard, if you live in an apartment building or something like this, grow a single mint plant. And just be in touch with that one plant will remind you of your own behavior and the impact that you're having as you go to grocery shopping or whatnot. And so I'm excited for all of you to become producers, become co-creators with this nature as you start to think about your backyard or the window sill in your apartment and start to engage nature. It will teach you so much, and it's so full of grace. She helps you heal so quickly. So I'm very excited that it's simple in the end to re-engage with life.
Cycle of life is so important, and I certainly do feel it's very, very important, as Zach does, to do something about that bare soil that's out there cooking in the sun. And I agree with that, that it has to be that organic matter. But I also do respectfully disagree. I think there's a lot of CO2 that's dangerous coming from power plants and cars and what have you. So I think we need to do both. Think we need to have less bare soil and to cut back on the excess CO2 that we're putting out in such great numbers.
And we do that through not engaging in these
Just
commercial agriculture practices, right? Because
absolutely. And the other
all
stuff
the
we've
things we've
been
been
talking
talking about.
about here on this show and elsewhere, riding a bike if weather and fitness permit, taking public transportation if it's
Yes.
available near you, all that, buying energy saving thermostats to turn the thermostat down in the winter and up in the summer, turn it off when you're away from the house, wake and sleep, leave and return modes, stuff like that. Weather stripping, cheap and easy stuff. You're going to save money and save energy. And because now that there's so many people on the planet, we just need to behave differently than we did even just 100 years ago.
Yeah. And I will provide people with links on my website for all of the books that you have written about these things that make it so easy for you to make these changes. Because there's so much that we can do, and it's really exciting. Two things that you just said that made me really excited, but also just like, what do we do? I want to get you in a room with Bill Gates. How do we do that? Because Bill Gates believes that GMOs are the answer to feeding all the people, right? And you just explained why that's not true and why it's not working. And not to mention what damage that can do to your body eating these things that are foreign chemical invaders. Um, but why, in your humble opinion, why do you think Bill Gates? I mean, Bill Gates seems like a smart dude. So why does he not understand this?
I think he's very well intentioned, but people just have this delusion. They deal with it in a comical way, but wonderfully in that movie, Don't Look Up. They think they're going to fix this thing with the asteroid coming to Earth with all this. We can do this. And, technology, there isn't always a magic technological fix. They think all these things are going to be wonderful. There are made by nature, entirely created by God, things like kudzu and hydrilla and all these things that are natural, not GMOs that have escaped on the planet from a place of zebra mussels were never in the Great Lakes, they were elsewhere on the planet. These things that have shown up in places, and we have a hell of a time controlling them. Now you're going to make something in a lab that you hope you're going to control once it's out there. You can't control the stuff like hydrilla and kudzu and zebra mussels that are native to the earth, that come from another planet, and they're in the wrong place. There's no predators for them, and things go wild. There's just so much danger. It's like I have a lot of friends, people I'm very close to, good environmentalists who really believe that nuclear power is the answer. I'm not one of them. I just happen to have met the guy who was the prime minister of Japan, at the time the Fukushima happened. But for two happy accidents, they would have had to evacuate Tokyo. This is what the guy said through an interpreter from his mouth to my ears. I heard him say it. Prime Minister of, I can't remember his name, but he was the prime minister when Fukushima happened. They had just filled the emergency water container. There's like a giant thing of water for emergencies. They just filled it to the top. It was full of water, like the day before. Lucky accident number one. Lucky accident number two, the earthquake, though it did a lot of damage, it made a dam by accident that kept all of that water from going away when things started to fall apart. If those two things, not one of them, but both of them had to happen, they would have had to evacuate Tokyo from the massive amount of radiation. That's the big downside. Now, I know there's upsides and downsides to lots of different kinds of energy. That's a big downside. So I say no to that. I say no to GMOs for the same reason. The downside is so down. If people want to, with tight controls, look at things in the lab, okay, fine by me. But to put it out there on corn and all that, there's so much danger involved. I'm not willing to take that risk, and I hope others don't want to take the risk too. I think he believes that. I have lots of other friends who believe that GMOs are the answer. I'm not one of them. Too much danger.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's maddening because I want them to sit and have this conversation with us and just to be able to help them, because if we all have the same end goal, then we have to have this conversation of how to arrive there. And if they are well intended, then they would want to have that conversation. The amount of farmland that he's bought and does not turn it into biodiverse farms, keeps it running as complete commercial farming. He owns more farmland than anyone in
Uh-oh.
our entire country. Why?
Well, he does own about 250,000 acres, but that's a drop in the bucket compared to our total farming acreage. So he's gotten a lot of headlines for that, but it's not at all a frightening number to me or the
Okay.
farmers. I think we recognize that the vast majority of farmland is controlled by farmers, or unfortunately, less and less farmers and more large multinational companies that are buying up that farmland. The why is because it's a great buffer against inflation, and so we just printed $4 trillion in the United States for quantitative easing during the pandemic, and that forces a global push towards inflation. And the best thing to invest in at that point, when you've got billions of dollars as a pension fund or a country or a large multinational fund, is to buy up farmland. So everybody's on a farmland rush right now, and this is a crisis, I think, because when you go to land that's now being managed by farmers that don't own the land, they have no incentive to do the right thing for the soil because the landowner can make that disappear immediately. It takes about 5 years for regenerative practices really start to radically change the bottom line for farmers. And it's exciting that it does. You can see 5x and 10x improvements in the bottom line for farmers by going regenerative. And the vast majority of those savings is by saving them the inputs to the soil. The soil becomes its own source as it regains vitality for the critical building blocks for nutrition for the plants and beyond. And so the farmer, to make those right decisions, has to put in some effort and a change in psychology in those first few years. But if they don't own the land, there's a crisis.
So I get that all of these things are extremely nuanced, but the very type A part of myself wants to fix this right now. And I know that's not, I know you all feel the same way, but I just feel like if all these really well intentioned people who believe that GMOs are good, but they also they believe in that not because of their, let's say we're going to take out the fact that it might be because they want to make money. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. It's not nefarious. They truly, genuinely care about feeding people and this earth. Then how can we all get them together in a room to discuss these issues so that we can all collectively decide to kick this thing in the butt and fix it?
I think the answer is economic models. And so that's how we're getting people to the table at our Farmers Footprint. We just launched our Australia arm, farmersfootprint.org.au, as well as the US one, which is farmersfootprint.us. And we're bringing all the stakeholders to tables because we're presenting a really, pretty convincing economic incentive to say, hey, everybody can participate in this future of food. In the United States, our food system is around $2 trillion. $2 trillion industry is going to pivot over the next 10, 20 years. It has to pivot because we're losing soil vitality so quickly right now. And so farmers can't keep their, like Ed very accurately described, we have our farmland on life support right now. We are on hospice in chemical farming. And so we have that 6 months to live kind of mentality that you would put into hospice. That's where we're at with chemical farming. And so no matter how aggressively they try to innovate technology, and they are trying to be aggressive, and the EPA is complicit in this. EPA has now approved 3 chemical, and now this year 5 chemical GMO seeds, which means a single seed can be sprayed with Roundup, 2,4-D, dicamba. Go down the list, and so we're creating these toxic stews to spray the land because there's so much GMO Roundup resistant weeds that have sprung up as the genetics are shared across biology. And so the EPA has approved 3 drugs and is in the process of approving 5 chemical seeds. Do you want your children to be eating or on a planet where 5 chemical seeds are being produced in hundreds of millions of acres globally? That's what's afoot right now. And so the complicitness of this is because there's economic incentives that are artificially boosted by taxpayer dollars through the Farm Bill and through the USDA crop insurance program. If For you to
Ugh,
get USDA crop insurance, you have to be growing a commodity that they consider safe, and so you'll get paid to go buy your inputs for your year as a farmer if you promise to do chemical farming.
yeah,
If you say I'm going to do regenerative farming, they won't give you the loan. The bank won't
yeah,
give you the loan because the USDA won't insure your crop if
yeah,
it's not under conventional or USDA organic management. And so this is where I get excited about Biome Capital and thinking about how can we get capital to actually work for the farmer, is we can bypass these artificial stop points and we can start to show investors that there's a huge opportunity. If you can 5x or 10x the bottom line for farmers in 5 years, that is a huge economic opportunity for investors to become part of the solution with the farmers. And in the same way, Nestle is at the table, and you get these huge, food companies that we think of as Darth Vader and have done more humanitarian abuse as well as planetary abuse than maybe any other companies in the world historically, are sitting down at the table because they see consumers changing. Consumers want to become part of the solution, but they look at the grocery store and they say none of these products are working. And I take my hat off to Mark Schneider. He's the new CEO in the last 5 years or so for Nestle, and Mark is really out to beat the band on this. He publicly stated a few months ago that 98% of the food that Nestle produces is bad for your health. Nobody's
oh,
ever said
that's
that in the food
lovely.
industry.
Yeah,
And so to see
Wow.
CEOs of huge multinational, multi-billion dollar corporations saying, we are the problem and we are doing something to change it. He made the pledge that by 2030, they'd have something like 14 million tons of regenerative supply chain ingredients in their Nestle food products by 2030. That was a terrifying thing, I'm sure, for his supply chain, managers to hear, because there is zero of their portfolio right now that is regenerative supply chain. And so Mark called largely to say, okay, I just said this thing. Now, how do we get there? What are we going to have to do? How do we participate in creating an opportunity for the farmers to make their change of mentality? So I'm encouraged because I think everybody ultimately does care about their kids and their grandkids, and it is starting to be so irrefutable that we have a crisis that we're passing on to our children and grandchildren, that you get not only the CEO of Nestle, but you get lawmakers and you get people who 10 years ago looked like they were the problem today becoming part of the solution. We are all in this together, and we're all going to have a high amount of grace towards one another. We're going to have to let go of the polarization, the hatred that we might feel towards whatever, colonialist or, Bill Gates or whoever we have in our mind as the bad guy. We have to come to terms with the fact that they have all of that money because they created something energetically that we decided to buy. And so it is our behavior that made the Gates Foundation, this focus of money. And therefore, it is our behavior that can sit down in community with the Gates Foundation or whoever else and start to say, okay, we got a crisis. We understand that there's a lot of energy pent up in money on the planet. How do we start to change these industries? And ultimately, I think that we need to boil back to the fact that your health is your number one way in which to vote for a healthy planet. When you make small decisions to be healthy today, to drink water instead of soda, to drink tea instead of some sort of high fructose containing beverage, you are voting for the planet at that point, and you're doing it through health. And so we have this program that created called Journey of Intrinsic Health, .com there, Journey of Intrinsic Health. And it's an 8-week program to help you understand how do you create that lifestyle of vitality within yourself that helps you shape the energetics of your impact on the planet and helps you become that co-creative process. How do you close the carbon loop in your own body? How do you create a water cycle in your own body? Because you are drying out just like farmland. You are dying of biodiversity just like the farmland. And so the 8-week program is really there to show you are a microcosm of the planet. And when you make these fundamental changes in lifestyle to get yourself reconnecting carbon loops, water loops in your system, you actually become a creative being again. Because when you're inflamed and you are sick, you actually shut down the neurologic process for creativity and you become in this fight or flight state, the sympathetic nervous system. When you take away the stress and you turn on the parasympathetic nervous system and you improve sleep quality, improve the way in which you breathe, all these simple things, suddenly the part of your brain that makes you aware of not only your creative potential, but also your purpose comes back online. And so I'm excited that our bodies are the microcosm. And if we begin there, we start an immediate ripple effect. And in that process, we need to become part of the problem of the past and part of the opportunity for the future.
Ed, would you like to say anything else before we sort of wrap up?
No, I'd just like to say this has been a wonderful discussion, learning a lot of things here, and I certainly appreciate you and all that you've done for the environment for years. I'm so happy to meet you, Zach, and hear about your wonderful work. I'm just proud to be a friend of yours, Alicia, and to talk about these things are important to us. I mean, there's ways that we can make the world a better place from what we were given, and I certainly want to do that for my children and grandchildren. I have both, so uh, I'm just proud to know you both and to work with you these many years, Alicia, and just all of us try to live simply so that others can simply
Mm.
live.
I love you so much, Ed. You're amazing. You're a total
You too.
hero. So glad people get to have you in this world. And
Right back at you.
Zach, thank you for being here. Both of you, thank you just for sharing so much knowledge. And this was such an exciting conversation for me, so inspiring. And I want to make sure that my veggie garden isn't killing the worms. I think they're
Yeah,
fine. I think they're fine. I see them there, but I'm going to just figure that out. Um, and
keep
I'm
the
just,
soil covered.
yeah, but I'm
Just
so,
a straw is all it takes. If you have a backyard garden and you're realizing you can see your dirt, buy
uh,
a bunch of bales of straw and give it, 3 or 4 inches of material on top of that. Peel that straw back in a month, and you're going to see 1,000 worms per foot. Like, it's a
amazing.
crazy recovery of the earthworms just to keep it covered. So straw is a good beginning point if you need organic material to protect that soil.
Thank you.
I agree.
Um, so this has just been wonderful. Thank you both so much for all your knowledge. We will provide resources for people because you have both have so much to share and have done so much good in this world. So I will always be on your team fighting for you guys. Thank you so, 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 so much from the bottom of my heart. To dig deeper into this episode's topic and resources, visit thekindlife.com. The Real Heal is an iHeartRadio production made in partnership with Frequency Media. I'm your host, Alicia Silverstone. From iHeartRadio, our managing producer is Lindsay Hoffman. From Frequency Media, Michelle Corey is our executive producer, Jordan Rizzieri is our producer, and Imani Leonard and Laura Boyman are our associate producers. Sydney Evans is our dialogue editor, and Claire Bidigary Curtis is our mixer and sound designer. This podcast is available on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and wherever podcasts are found.